Hey guys, Political Junkie 2414 here, and welcome back to another 2024 Senate election analysis video. Hope you guys are having a great day, and today we're going to be talking about the Senate race in the state of Ohio, a state that has traditionally been a battleground for both parties and a bellwether state nationally that has trended Republican in recent years. But there are a lot of interesting things to talk about in this race, and we're going to talk about them in depth. So, if you guys like what you've seen so far, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and check out some of my other 2024 Senate analysis videos, as well as my prediction videos for the presidency, the House, and the Senate elections. I do plan to make a lot more content, over the next couple of weeks. I think it's going to be because I've kind of been falling off recently, and I do want to make some more content. Yeah. Anyways, now getting into the Senate race, let's talk about the politics of Ohio in general. The state historically has been a bellwether, meaning that usually the party that wins the presidency wins the state. Um, you know, in 2000, George W. Bush won the presidency and defeated Al Gore in the state by about 3 points. In 2004, it got a little bit closer. He won it by two against John Kerry. But it was the state that put him over the top. It was the state that, when it was called, gave Bush 270 electoral votes, which was, or put him over that finish line, which is, what is required to win the Electoral College and the presidency. But in 2008, as the country, became, more there was a lot more anti-Republican sentiment due to the financial crisis and, George W. Bush just generally being unpopular for, many reasons. The Democrats won the election, and they won Ohio, and Barack Obama won Ohio by 5 points against John McCain, which was still smaller than Obama's overall national victory. I think he won the popular vote by like 8 points, maybe nine. But he won Ohio by 5 points. And this was, as a Democrat in Ohio, this was a pretty impressive margin. If you look, across the rest of these states, Iowa was voted for Obama by 10 points, Wisconsin 14, Michigan 17, Indiana went to Obama. Pennsylvania was 10 points. Nevada voted for Obama by double digits. I mean, some of these, results would be impossible in the modern day. In 2012, which was obviously a worst election for Obama, but he still ended up winning the presidency, and he won Ohio by 3 points against Mitt Romney. This continued its streak of being a bellwether state. But in 2016, something happened. Not necessarily, Ohio didn't necessarily vote or lose its bellwether status, but it voted more favorably for Republicans than it had in a long time. Donald Trump voted or won the state by 8 points over Hillary Clinton, as he swept the Rust Belt, and did much better than Mitt Romney did, or John McCain, or George W. Bush did in a lot of these states. He won back these, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, which had not voted Democratic, or had not voted Republican in decades on the presidential level, and won Ohio by 8 points. And in 2020, the state was meant to get a little bit closer. Or meant to get a lot closer according to polling. Now, polling in Ohio was not the best in 2016. I think it had Trump up by a couple of points and he won it by 8. But in 2020, the state was pretty much, it was a state that Biden heavily invested in. He invested particularly, in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, which were the three states that, Democrats needed, particularly, and focused heavily on to win the election, because they recognized their errors from 2016. But in Ohio, Biden was supposed to do a lot better than he ended up doing. He was supposed to lose it by, a point or two, and he ended up losing it by 8. By 8. It was, almost exactly the same margin that Hillary Clinton lost the state to Trump by 4 years prior. And this was when Ohio became, lost its bellwether streak, because Joe Biden won the presidential election nationally, by sweeping through the Rust Belt and improving, flipping states like Arizona and Georgia, which hadn't voted Republican since the 90s. But he lost Ohio, and Ohio voted 12% to the right of the country as a whole. Maybe I think it was like 12.5% because Biden won the popular vote by 4.5. So Ohio was voted even further to the right of the nation in 2020 than it did in 2016, when I think Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by 2.5, something like that. Um, but either way, this cemented, this has, essentially confirmed that Ohio is indeed a right trending state. A lot of that has to do with Donald Trump and the Republican Party improving and being able to reach out to working class voters, which who for decades were much more Democratic leaning. If you look at Eastern Ohio in particular, a county like Mahoning voted for Gore by and Kerry by roughly the same margin. Obama actually did better there in 2012 than he did in 2008. It was overall a very solid Democratic county. But in 2016, Clinton only won the county by 3, and Trump actually flipped it in 2020, despite doing technically worse than he did in 2016 overall statewide. But let's talk about, the elephant in the room, the Democrat who has been able to win in Ohio in recent memory, or at least in the last decade or so. Because while Ohio has, a lot of Republican statewide elected officials, there is one office that the Democrats can, that the Democrats have won in recent memory, and that is the Senate seat, one of the Senate seats from the state of Ohio. And their incumbent is Sherrod Brown, who is running for re-election this year to a fourth term. But let's talk about his electoral history. Brown was first elected in the Democratic wave midterm election of 2006. Um, and he defeated then Republican incumbent Mike DeWine. If you recognize his name, it's because he's currently governor of Ohio. But Brown won by 12 points, and this was a pretty, big, win for the Democrats. It helped them regain control of the Senate. DeWine was very unpopular, and the Republicans had pretty much, gave up on, had pretty much abandoned DeWine, and considered him dead on arrival by election day, because the polling and the overall outlook was that Brown was going to easily beat him, and he did. He did very well in the traditionally Democratic areas like Columbus and Cleveland, the big cities, as well as doing very well in the with working class voters across the state, pretty much dominating the eastern border except for this one county. And in 2012. Brown won again. He won by less. He defeated Josh Mandel, who was at that time the Ohio State Treasurer, and it was only a 6 point margin. But keep in mind that this was larger than Obama's victory in the state on the same ballot against Mitt Romney. Now, Brown did have, Mandel did have to contend with the fact that there was a libertarian in the race, which, likely did take away some Republican votes, or some votes away from Republicans. But libertarians also can take away votes from Democrats, and this overall margin was very impressive. Brown won some of the counties on the eastern side of the state that voted for Mitt Romney. For example, Monroe County. You can see it voted for Brown, but it voted for Romney, on the same ballot. And he actually flipped Hamilton County, which is home to Cincinnati. This is one of the few very left trending areas in Ohio. Which is, as I've already established, is a pretty Republican trending state. In 2018 came around, and Brown was in a different position. This was post 2016. Trump had proven to have a strong, to have been able to perform well in Ohio. And Brown was up for re-election. Now, it was Trump's midterm. This was a bad midterm for Republicans overall. They lost control of the House, and they did not do particularly well in the Senate elections, but they still held on to the chamber because Republicans were able to defeat Democratic incumbents in red states like North Dakota, Missouri, Indiana, and they won over swing states like Florida. But one of the states that voted for Trump, that had a Democratic incumbent up for re-election in 2018, that they didn't win, was Ohio. Brown won by about 7 points, slightly larger than his margin in 2012. And this is an interesting, topic, a topic of discussion, because Brown did well. A 7 point victory in Ohio as a Democrat is nothing to scoff at. But considering the national environment and his opponent, Jim Renacci, who did not get a lot of, um, you know, overall, or did not get a strong amount of support, was from the national GOP, which basically viewed the races, or viewed Ohio as unnecessary, and a distraction from winning the majority. When they had to focus on other red states. Renacci basically wasn't able to campaign properly, and he did not run a strong campaign. But the thing about his performance, while he did lose and he lost big, was that the polling, like in 2016 and 2020, underestimated Republicans. Brown, as you can see, most of these polls was up by 11, 12, 17, 18, 19, all, these crazy margins. And I don't think anyone really expected Brown to win by, over 15 points, but the consensus was, Brown wins by high single digits, low double digits. And, while he didn't underperform that badly, he still did, win by less than 7, which, not a lot of, as which you can see, pretty much none of these polls indicated. The last poll, Change Research, had him winning by 10 points. Now, he still did very well in the working class areas of the state. He, was able to win Mahoning, Portridge, and Trumbull, which are these three, kind of this is kind of the eastern Ohio counties that I kind of grouped together as being, prime examples of working class counties in the state that have been very receptive to Trump, but historically have been very Democratic. Brown has performed well in these counties. He won Mahoning, I think, by 21, and he was able to rely on Democrats doing very well in Cleveland and Columbus as well as Cincinnati. And Brown, to his credit, did outperform the gubernatorial candidate for, in 2018, Richard Cordray, who lost to Mike DeWine. And, Cordray was also underestimated or overestimated in the polling data. But, that was also a localized race. That was a race that, Republicans had a better candidate in. They had Mike DeWine, who was, at that time, I believe the current attorney general, former U.S. senator, former lieutenant governor. He had held a lot of statewide positions. And so, and to Cordray's credit, he was also, an established candidate. But, Brown was also the incumbent. He has a unique appeal to the working class that not a lot of Democrats have anymore in Ohio. And so I think when you look at that, that really gives Democrats an upside in the state. But let's look at the Senate map in general. Like in 2018, Democrats have a pretty unfavorable Senate map if you look at the incumbent party status, or the status of which party holds the majority of these competitive races that I've highlighted. You can make an argument if Florida is competitive or not. You can see here, and this is counting independents as Democrats. You can see the Democrats hold the vast majority of them. They hold free seats in red states, states that Trump won in 2016 and 2020. Those three are West Virginia with Joe Manchin, Montana with John Tester, and Ohio with Sherrod Brown. Now, all three, I'm not going to discount any of these incumbents. I think all of them have their particular strengths. I've already gone over the states of Montana and West Virginia in previous videos, and I will continue to talk about them. But I think Brown is in a uniquely tough position because he's running in a presidential year. And yes, he won in 2012, but let's look back at the 2012 Senate map. Sorry about that. Kind of, flop, kind of had a, brain fart there. But you can look back at the Senate map and you're probably thinking, what the hell is this? Missouri is safe blue, Indiana likely, Pennsylvania is likely, West Virginia is safe, Florida is likely blue, but Arizona is, going to Republicans, Nevada is going to Republicans, North Dakota is going to Democrats. I mean, this is absolutely crazy. Massachusetts is within single digits. And the truth is that this was back during a time when the Senate elections were not nearly as where the Senate elections weren't as polarized and as correlated to the presidential results as they are now. If you look back to 2020, the only state that voted for, that voted for one party for, excuse me, let me rephrase that. The only state that voted for, a certain party, for one party at the presidential level, but voted for but voted for the other on the Senate level was Maine with Susan Collins, who is a tried and tested candidate. And this was a shock to many, but that's not what we're here to talk about. My point here is that every other state you see right here, even the competitive ones. All the states the Democrats won went to, were in states that went to Joe Biden in the presidential election. Republicans, with the exception of Maine, won Senate races in only states that Trump won. And in 2022, the only state that elected a a senator from from another party, from the opposite party of who they voted for in 2020, was Wisconsin with Ron Johnson. Biden won the state, but Mandela Barnes narrowly lost. And, we're not here to talk about, this race in particular, but my point is that these races are very much correlated and, to to the presidential outcome in the state. A midterm election, yes, is different. And I think that Brown, does have some benefits from running in a presidential year, such as, probably being able to count on Biden to bring out black voters in, Cleveland with the help of Kamala Harris. And I think also Trump likely to be the candidate will hurt whoever the Republicans put up in the suburbs. But Brown overall is going to have to outrun Joe Biden by likely 8 to 10 points. Biden's likely not going to be able to, I highly doubt that he's going to win Ohio, but maybe best case scenario, he loses it by 6, like Tim Ryan lost it in 2022, which was a pretty impressive victory. But overall, it's going to be really hard for Brown to overperform, especially if Biden's losing the state by upwards of 10. But let's talk about the Republican candidates. I kind of went on about how Renacci was not a great candidate. Let's look at who is running now. Well, you have Republicans running, the three main contenders for the race are Matt Dolan, the state senator from Cleveland, who ran for Senate last year, Frank LaRose, the Ohio Secretary of State, who won his reelection easily in 2022, and Bernie Moreno, who was also a candidate for U.S. Senate. He's more of a J.D. Vance type of candidate who's an outsider, and he actually has Vance's endorsement here, which is very interesting and may help him overall in the primary. Currently, LaRose is the front runner, but there's a lot of time to go. There's a lot of undecideds in these polls, and overall, I think that Republicans should be looking at should be focused on Ohio. And I do believe that they will be, no matter if they put up a, more lackluster candidate like Moreno, who could, bomb in the suburbs and, against a candidate like Sherrod Brown not do so well in the working class areas. I think that they could lose it. But either way, Ohio is, as I showed you guys with that Senate map, Ohio is one of those one of those free states that Trump won both times that has a Democratic incumbent. And I can bet you that no matter who the GOP puts up, they're going to focus on beating Brown. They're not going to abandon him last time, because they now have incumbents in those red states that I talked about, like North Dakota, Missouri, and Indiana. Indiana, yes, is an open seat, but that's besides the point. Republicans are going to easily hold that seat. But the point is, Democrats don't have as much red territory to defend, where Ohio can kind of slip underneath the GOP, can kind of slip out of the GOP's, grasp. So, overall, I think that Ohio is going to be a very, competitive Senate race. Who do I think is the most likely candidate to win, or to win the nomination? I think it would be Frank LaRose, and I do believe he is um, the best of the three. Polling right now shows Matt Dolan typically does the best out of the three, and Moreno does the worst. LaRose is kind of in the middle. Dolan, I think, has the upside of being a moderate who can do well in the suburbs and kind of, you know, kind of run parallel to Trump, but also, not also be too alienating to the working class voters that he will need to win. I think LaRose is more of your typical establishment Republican, conservative, not too controversial, particularly. Say what you want about him, but I haven't really heard a story where he has done something completely outrageous. Correct me if I'm wrong in that department. But I think Moreno has the downside of running against a Democratic incumbent, and, potentially alienating suburban voters. And even if he does well with, Trumpian, or with Trump, Trump's working class base. it might not be enough against an incumbent who's already proven to be able to do well in that with those voters. Now, I think Trump being on the ballot is going to hinder Brown's ability to outperform Biden with those voters. I think, and the fact that it is a presidential year makes it harder for Brown to do well with that group. But I think, when you're looking at a candidate like Moreno, it's a little bit different from JD Vance. JD Vance, while he was running against a strong candidate in Tim Ryan also wasn't the incumbent. He was a U.S. representative who had built up his name recognition and did well. I think he had, I think he was able to appeal to some Trump voters, who had, previously been more Democratic leaning with his more centrist message. But overall, he still, is not Sherrod Brown. He is not, he gave Republicans a scare. He made them divert resources to this race. And, yet he still did pretty well. And I think Brown's going to do even better. I think he can outperform, if he can outperform Biden by, 8 to 9 points, he's got a really good chance. We're in pure toss up territory right now because I think Trump is going to win Ohio by, 8 to 10. But right now, I think that I'm more comfortable leaning on the side of, leaning towards the Republicans who have the benefit of a down ballot effect. I think that Ohio right now goes to Frank LaRose, who I do think will be the GOP Senate nominee. I could be wrong about that, but as of right now, that is what I believe. If it's Bernie Moreno, I'm a little bit more cautious. Not to say that Moreno is necessarily unelectable. I don't think Republicans are going to give up on this race no matter what. They really need it, to be quite frank. Especially if they lose the presidency, which seems likely, because then they won't have a tie-breaking, and the ability to you know, break a 50-50 tie with a Republican vice president. But, they really need to watch out what happens in Ohio. This is a race that is going, that has a lot of unknown factors, and that's why I'm putting it in the tilt red column right now. I could see it going to, I could see it shifting, my opinion changing and Brown being the favorite in my eyes. I could also see it becoming a lean red state. But either way, it's going to be a very interesting race to watch. And it's one that, if Democrats want to hold the Senate majority, they really need to pay attention to it and win it. And if they are winning Ohio, chances are they're winning the rest of, they're winning the majority of these states. Maybe not Texas and Florida, but or West Virginia, but you get my point. I kind of, based on probability, if Ohio's going blue, a lot of these other swing states that have the Democrats have a more realistic shot at, probably will be too. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you liked, if you liked the video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and share this video with someone who you think would enjoy it. Do you agree with me? Is Sherrod Brown, currently, do you think Sherrod Brown right now is going to lose his reelection to his reelection bid, or do you think that I'm being too harsh on him and that maybe he can or that maybe he's the favorite right now despite the down ballot the likely down ballot effects that a presidential election year plagues candidates with. So, yeah, let me know in the comments down below what you think about this Senate race. I think it's going to be a very interesting, one to watch, one of the most competitive races, on the map for next year. Check out my non-political channel, Interactor127, and my comrades channel, Growlingzoo666. Again, thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate all of your support, and I'll see you guys next time when I talk about all things politics. See ya.